the Second World War is over. I'm sure that doesn't come as news to any of you. But the battle continues. And it continues primarily on the intellectual and the mimetic planes. We're fighting today for rootedness against cosmopolitanism. We're fighting for identity against homogeneity. We're fighting against individualism, consumerism, inauthenticity. We're fighting for the natural against the plastic. We're fighting to bring about a new worldview and a new world order in which rootless cosmopolitanism and selfish calculation and global homogenization simply have no place. So the consummation of Greek philosophy for him is modern technological civilization in which man thinks of himself as entirely rootless and thinks of the world as merely a stockpile of resources to be manipulated and ultimately consumed. The uprooting of man from history and place deprives us of sources of meaning and measure, creating a world of unbounded nihilism. For Heidegger, unbounded nihilism gives rise to a phenomenon he calls the gigantic. The result of machination has been scientific and technological progress, increased mastery of nature, a burgeoning global population, the abolition of all distances, and the homogenization of everything. Modernity is a time of the progressive unfolding of infinite tasks. Like the very idea of progress, it's an infinite task basically by which man attains greater and greater control over the world and also achieves greater and greater power. It's a task of self-divinization in a way. The new is always the improved, the bigger is always the better, and quantity, as he puts it, has become a quality. Now, the consequence of machination and giganticism, of unbounded technological nihilism, is, quote, the devastation of everything. It's really rather prophetic. I mean, he was writing this in the 1930s, and if he were alive today, he would be astonished at how many more people there are, how much more pollution there is, how much more homogenization there is, how much more vulgarization there is. All of these things that he thought were terrible have been enormously intensified since this time. And he refers to this state as absolute, unrestricted, global, or planetary, quote, criminality. It's a crime to devastate the world, both the biological world, the ecological world, but also the world of distinct cultures and peoples. And Heidegger uses this term authenticity. It's one of the central terms of his thought. And basically what Heidegger means by being authentic is owning up to the fact that we do not create our identities. Our identities are handed to us. They're handed to us by our culture and our language and by our bloodlines, if you will. Heidegger's conclusion is that all cognitive activities, even those of philosophy and science, are made possible by language and other social practices that are ultimately learned by participating in the common life of a society. And so at the root of every cognitive act is ultimately ethnic identity.
Well, hello, Puff Wagon. I think I did post the, yes, I did. Heidegger Authenticity is already in the description. But obliging person that I am, I have posted the link in the chat. So we have Greg Johnson promoting existentialism. Heidegger is an existentialist. What is an existentialist? He is someone who denies the existence of God and therefore wants to find his own meaning. Now, I know there is one Christian existentialist, and his name is, oh, he's one of those Swedish ones. Let me just look up the name, which temporarily escapes me. Kierkegaard. And what's really odd about these people, these existentialists who claim to come from, well, who say they come from a Christian background and say they're Catholics and Lutheran and whatever, I fear they are people who don't really think about these things properly. So we know that Greg Johnson is saying that we have our identities imposed on us. And I think a lot of people might not regard it as a good thing and kick back against the identity that was imposed on them by an accident of birth. As we all know, Jews kick against it. They don't see why they should obey God's laws, in particular the set of rules specially made for Jews, which are more restrictive and more severe. So they assimilate while at the same time being allowed to use their Jewish identity. This annoys Gentiles, and when they get annoyed enough, pogroms are conducted. But it should be obvious to people that if you really did believe in God, you just obey his laws. So the Orthodox, the religious Jew would say, well, we were made Jews, and therefore we have to remain Jews until we know the nature and purpose of God's reason in making Jews his chosen people, and I guess Muslims would think the same thing and obey the laws in the Quran, while Jews would obey their laws in the Talmud and the Torah. So what is Kierkegaard doing as a Christian? Now let me just check what religion he is officially. So Heidegger is officially Catholic. So I'm basically saying that Kierkegaard actually is an atheist. He just happened to be born Christian, nominally. So he's a Dane. Let me see what it says about his religion. So he wrote theological works on Christian ethics and the institution of the church, and he was extremely critical of the doctrine and practice of Christianity as a state-controlled religion, called Caesaro papism. He was a member of the Church of Denmark, and we know how these things go. If you know any Scandinavian people, they will complain about being registered as Lutheran or Church of Denmark as soon as they're born, because of the ancient idea that if you are the subject of a Christian king, you are expected to follow his religion, and if you want to break against that tradition, you'll have to opt out. And there will be many social pressures to keep you in, because you don't want to upset mum and dad and your family and social circle. So it is clear that he doesn't believe in these things, or he wouldn't have written his books and philosophized to that extent. I don't profess to be familiar with his work, but his philosophy, we can deduce, is really an act of questioning the state church. And wondering what the hell we are supposed to do if we don't believe in God. So in his time, he wasn't really allowed to say these things. He was born in 1813 and died in 1855. And the Church of Denmark would be so let me just check who was king at the time, because I know that Denmark was once an absolute monarchy. I remember going to the Museum of Copenhagen, and I saw all those torture instruments for people who didn't go to church, and even a beheading sword. So very interesting, and obviously it was a absolute monarch who was able to do these things, behead people and punish people who didn't go to church. I actually wasn't planning to talk about Kierkegaard, so I'm afraid I am a little bit vague. So when did Denmark stop becoming an absolute monarchy? I'm a bit vague about that. I know. Let me just find out for you. The Danish absolute monarchy was introduced by Frederick III with a coup in 1660 and was abolished in 1848 with a peaceful revolution after the death of Christian the Eighth. So Christian the Eighth. Well, this was obviously in Kierkegaard's lifetime. He died in 1855 at the age of 42, and Christian the Eighth. When did he die? Well, it was in a time of Kierkegaard anyway. Okay, I'm a bit vague. I'm sorry. I don't really know Danish history, but this was a time of um, the culture war in Europe. We Some of us might be surprised that these things happened in the olden days, but I'm afraid this culture war thing has been with us since, well, I think since forever. I'm sure even under an absolute monarch, there were lots of people who didn't quite agree with the way things were done and complained, sometimes successfully and sometimes ending in um, execution and heresy and subversion. Um, Accusations being proven after. Um, and what was I saying? Sorry, I was saying that people were cancelled before and also now because we have a different. I mean, we still disagree with each other, and there is a culture war, and it can be settled when, whichever side wins the debate. So, as an existentialist, Kierkegaard, I'm saying, was not a proper Christian, because if you were a proper Christian, you would just obey the king, because that was what the whole point of Christianity was. You obeyed the king, you prayed to Jesus if you got upset about things, but you knew that your Christian duty was to obey the king and the law of the land, and if you did that, you'd be all right. So, what Greg is proposing, do you agree with it? I mean, we already know a lot of Jews don't want to carry on being Jews just because mum and dad were Jews and Jewesses, and this I think will be common to anyone who questions tradition. And I'm certainly not saying we shouldn't question tradition, because I'm one of those people who do question my tradition and, well, everybody else's. So existentialism is important in that not everybody believes in God, and people do, when they question the existence of God, have to make up their own purpose in life, and that is basically what existentialism is. So Greg is saying we were born whatever race we are, and we have to stick with it. All right, nobody's suggesting that we can change our race, but really that this is a question of morality. What should we do if we find ourselves thrown into this world, as Heidegger says? He talks about the nature of being thrown in the world, as if we were randomly thrown by some indifferent and impersonal force. What are we to do when we land on Earth and don't quite agree with our traditions? And I'm saying, actually, it's very simple. We can't help who our parents are, what race, what colour of skin we have, what class we're born into, whether we're short or tall, or beautiful or ugly, or smart or clever. And to the extent that we can change our lives, it is through personal effort, such as excelling, at school and choosing an occupation, a vocation, a profession, and making the most of our potential. And so, what are we to do if we find ourselves thrown into a confused and confusing world of people around us who are rootless cosmopolitans? What is the least that we can do to anchor ourselves in some way to do something that is eternal, universal, true, and unchallengeable? And I think you know where I'm going with this. If we were orphans and had no idea who mum and dad are, if we had no relations, no family, what are we to do with ourselves? I think we're just left with truth, with logic, with morality. And I think we all know that success in life is about joining a group. So we find ourselves a member of our family, or our church, our mosque, whatever religious place of worship we go to, our social clubs, our gym, our local pub, whatever group of humans we choose to associate ourselves with. And if we are to think logically about advancing ourselves, then we would have to admit that our religious group is the most significant group that we can hope to choose. Although in theory it is possible for us to acquire and lose our nationality, we can more easily change our religion. And obviously, if we're happy with what we have and don't want to offend mum and dad, then we stick to the religion of our parents. But if we sense that something is not quite right, we complain about the government more than we think we should. If we feel something is deeply, deeply wrong, then we ought to think about religious and political solutions to our moral problems. And so I'm saying we have to choose a religion if we're not quite happy with the one we have, or the one that our state has imposed on us. So as we can see, Kierkegaard was trying to make up his mind about what to do. He obviously wasn't happy with this absolute monarchy of Denmark, which changed from being an absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy. And obviously there were, controversies and disagreements, and which eventually resolved themselves. But as each age passes, we will find new controversies arise, and this is exactly where we are now. So I think you know what I'm going to say, that it's quite obvious what religion we ought to have. There are only five world religions. We can safely ignore the Eastern religions because they're not much cop. They're not really imperial religions, and there are only 3 Abrahamic religions, and we're not Jews. And Christianity has failed the West, so there's only one obvious solution, and we should exercise our powers of deduction and moral reasoning by choosing correctly. So I don't know what Greg is is choosing. Well, what is he saying? He's saying, let's be white, let's stick to Western values, while not defining what Western values are. And we already know it's not enough to just say, white values. I mean, what are white values? Western civilization is more than people just being white. And Western civilization has changed over the ages, from paganism to Christianity and next to Islam, if Westerners correct themselves and submit to truth, logic, and morality. So before I go, I should talk about authenticity. So one of Heidegger's pet ideas is that we must be true to ourselves. What does this even mean? He never really defined it. I don't pretend to have read his books, but I know that he doesn't define it because, all the Wikipedia entries, etc., would have said. What does it mean to live with authenticity? I mean, ask a Jew. And then you'll have to ask, well, is he a secular Jew? Is he a religious Jew? And then you won't really know. Most of us cannot agree whether it is better to be a secular Jew or a religious Jew. And if we are Gentiles, we would have to decide whether we are the religious Gentile or the secular Gentile. And authenticity, to make it easy to understand, I would argue is we have to be true to our principles. But then, what are our principles if we haven't yet chosen our moral system? So in the West, we would be, well, in Britain anyway, we would be told that our religion is fundamental British values. This is the new religion now. It's not Anglicanism, as so many people think. I used to think the official religion of Britain was Anglicanism, but no, it is fundamental British values, and that is not in any way defined other than this vague list of tolerance, democracy, respect for others, blah blah. So that's not enough, but I mean, it's our ruling class is saying, let's subscribe to universal human values, and it is democracy, respect for others, all that sort of thing. And I think a lot of us are saying that's not enough, and we need something more. What is the essential thing that we want, that we are not being given? And I'm saying it's a proper religion. It's a proper religion with rules that says always do this and never do that. And that is the only badge of identity it is desirable and necessary to have. Because if we don't have rules, proper rules that all of us can understand and apply in a way that would be agreed on by others, then we haven't got a religion. We just have a mockery of one. And that won't protect us from our internal and external enemies. And therefore, we will, whether we like it or not, have to choose a moral system and a religious group, whether we like it or not. Thank you for listening.